and spectrality, or the social definition. Are you all ready? Ableist language strengthens oppression. If they are right, the debate actually matters, and that if they're right, the debate actually matters, then it's a question of how we actually create better forms of political advocacy. It should not be based around ableist language, because that only reinscribes violence. Now, I want to make a couple of things very important. One is that the fact that the use of blind spot is something that affects lived experience. Their argument that we cannot conceptualize or know about it because we come from Western epistemologies. I am blind. I will not be able to see literally anything, even with the help of glasses, by the time I am 45, because I am not able to. I also don't have things like depth perception. I have no peripheral vision. I need glasses, and I've had multiple surgeries on my eyes. The assumption that knowledge is the ability to see is offensive, because it makes the assumption that the only way I can interpret the knowledge around me is by understanding that there is a blind spot. Even their whole argument in cross-ex reifies this problem. The statement that we are not able to interpret or we cannot understand unless there is a knowledge of blind spot makes the assumption that blindness is not anything more than what it is. It is a slur. It is something you should not allow. Now, this is very important given our wheelchair dancer evidence, which indicates that you should not condone the use of ableist language, because it structures what it means for us to actually engage in political advocacy. The affirmative only reifies domination, which turns the entirety of the case. Now, all we have to win is that there is a risk that the ableism with which they produces only recreates violence for you to vote negative, because the alternative, i.e. rejecting their assumptions about both visuality and the metaphor of standing and still engaging in the advocacy of the one they see. Now, the ableism is so pervasive, the most vigilantly challenge made into an ear-doomed practice via social castigation, empirically confronting hierarchical attitudes to the level of rhetoric self. Czerny in 11, if you look at the problem of disability, the ableist absolves its responsibility for the discrimination, we not recognize its presence. There's trying to critics testifying ableism so apparent and irredeemable, one cannot practice it without incurring social castigation. This requires substantial vigilance for ableist thinking pervades culture. This pervasiveness of this metaphor suggests the scale of work ahead, the ease with which one can resort to use them warrants of the need for critical validation of one's own rhetoric. The test can be accomplished. We can reform ableist culture by using rhetoric to craft awareness and political action. Now, the critique solved by confronting ableism at the level of rhetoric. So the attitude that keep ableism alive leads to productive, corrective practices. If failure to confront it means that all efforts to challenge oppression will operate within the context of ableism. It means that even if the 1AC is an effective political strategy, even if it is a mandatory potential for them, even if they think it's a good idea, even if they think it is a good idea, the fact that it always operates within an understanding of ableist oppression disavows that certain people cannot engage. You should think about the 1AC as an example of the revolution is something that they say will not be televised, but guess what? The revolution will also not be accessible for most people, because their engagement is one that always castigates certain bodies. Czerny in 11, the ableist culture stains that perpetuates the self-erotic ways of interpreting disability and deception about bodies that can produce ableism are learned adopting rhetorical perspective. Ableism exposes the social system to keep it alive, revealing how it thrives, suggests ways of promoting its demise. I'll apply a rhetorical solution to the problem, identifying ableism as rhetoric. It reveals how these corrective practices work. Ableism is city's form of rhetoric that has become redefined so widely accepted as concept that denies its own rhetoricity. The ability to address its name and spread its cultural assumptions, accepted articulately adopt the mantle what is it? Okay, here we go. Cultural assumptions accepting articulately adopt the mantle to become extremely difficult to rebut. The ableism itself testifies without doing so. Ableism thinking and interpreting law the context for making sense of it. Acts challenging discrimination to minimize their impact and reduce their symbolic potential, and you can even transform them into superficial measures to give the appearance of change. Yet you let a recalcitrant ableist system, which means that the affirmative still recreates that form of violence. Now, the argument that they're going to go for here is that the way that we have understood disability is a Western understanding, but this is just an example of why there are some examples of Western studies which are not bad, i.e. granted people with disabilities rights is an important thing for us to actually have the ability to understand that people with disabilities have an equal place as any other people, is of paramount importance. Also come before the affirmative, because it's a question of the language we use in this round. Now, to say disablement is the only way to actually understand change. That doesn't mean that a Western understanding, even if it's a Western understanding, that doesn't mean that lived experience is not important, which is the argument they made. I have the lived experience of being someone who is legally blind. I'm not able to perform acts without my glasses. I cannot see anything, and I'm pretty scared of when I'm actually not able to see anything, even with the help of glasses. That is the feeling of insecurity that is pretty important on our spectrality, Kate, because that's that feeling of insecurity, of knowing that we are all going to die, that we are all that active beings towards death. That is incredibly important. Now, they're talking about the lived experience of this people. This is is my lived experience, which means that their arguments how they engage in colonialism, this just turns this argument because they are an act of colonialism against my body, against my inability to see in certain instances. Now they say we are performing ableism. I'm performing my disability. I perform it every day, every moment that I am alive, every moment that I am alive as an example of me performing my own disability. I'm not performing ableism. I am a resistant strategy to it. I am the guerrilla strategy against it that allows me to actually create better forms of change in my own community. I'm better change in my own community. This argument is an example of this. This argument is an example of being that performance, being that example that our attorney evidence talks about of locating the problem within disability and actually creating solutions to stop it. Now, the argument that we are ableism is a form of white logic. No, it is not. Disability and castigation of people with disability is something that happens throughout the world. It is the thing we do not talk about. You should think about it like this. We have things like racism, sexism, and racism and sexism, which we talk about as active examples. Active examples of discrimination against certain bodies. We always talk about these things as the forms of active ones. Disability is the one that is passive one, where we do not actually think about it, when we would not actually think about it, or when they say certain ableist things, we do not make the presumption that it is an ableist term in the first place. This is our argument that we need to make it very obvious that the assumptions that we engage are built upon an ableist society and an ableist culture that you have to reject. You have an imperative to our wheelchair answer is just better on this. Our wheelchair is just better on this question, even if it is good, even if the arguments are right that ableism studies is a form of white logic. That does not mean that it's not a good form of Western thought, which takes up their monolithic argument about indigenous peoples. Now they say that we need to understand disability as linked to imperialism. Here's a distinction here. There is a difference between their argument about how people in the global south understand disability, and our argument about how ableist language operates. Our argument is that ableist language makes it impossible for us to actually create solutions for people in the global south, as our own evidence talks about, which means that their alternatives, a prior question to all of their arguments, they say all forms of colonization disable. Our argument is that understanding disability, treating it in tropes, simply using it as a metaphor, which is what our evidence talks about, is bad because it means that we cheapen the actual lived experience of people who actually have disabilities. The affirmative not able to do any of these things. They say disability linked to imperialism, but that doesn't mean that ableist language is okay. Additionally, this is just a question of how the alternative of rejecting that ableist language of the 1AC is able to resolve these things. We resolve it better by creating better forms of resistance to imperialism. I am very tired of people making blind metaphors. It is something that I consider a slur and have considered even before I did debate a slur for me to engage in. Yet in debate we like to throw it around and act as if it doesn't mean anything. It does. It is something that actually affects certain people, and yet we don't actually engage in those assumptions. Using the term is a bad one. It's something that you should engage in, so you should make something that you should reject. Our attorney evidence is very specific on this. You should not let them capture any form of the advocacy. They're able to choose and pick different words that they've used because they've used them and they have a meaning, and that meaning matters, which is what our attorney evidence indicates. Because the rhetoric of ableism is so pervasive, it has to be publicly rejected. Which means there's only a risk that the alternative solves the entire case, a permutation argument, and there's only a risk that our engagement is a better one. Spectrality. The alternative solves the entire case, understanding that we are all finite beings, people in different ways, more quickly different reasons, but the common thread between all of them is death. We should understand politics as specters with an embrace of finitude. It is necessary to start the phenomenon of abject population. The affirmative obfuscates approach to politics. Refusal of finitude is a conditional possibility for all violence, and imperative to limit our loss always manifests itself as escalating violence against the other, which is our Peterson evidence. Now, our relation to the other is always restricted by the threat of loss. Kinship attempts to foreclose that loss. Abandoning this collapses difference and recreates violence. Peterson accepted mourning conditions the possibility of kinship. Concept of kinship beds at certain times for mourning the second death by seeking to close the gap between something other fantasy, someone who's our kindred spirit, to penetrate someone who's our kindred spirit, to manage that we might bridge the abyss that stands between. If the alterity of the other can never be collapsed in the same relation, the other always haunted by the possibility of lost relationship with the friends are irrevocably shaped by the process of mourning, and the impending death of the other is always signaled to me by the unbridgeable alterity, by no kinship claim to fully finally surmount. What about living in the present? How can I explain to my friend that mourning conditions the possibility of is asking the question at all? The imperative living in the present ultimately negates the relation to the other. If I'm always already mourning the future loss of my friend, then our relation to one another never exists in a simple present, undivided by absence. Does not say that absence is merely destructive or cruel fact of life looms large over our relationships, mourning the loss of nation, our relationship to others. This card is fantastic on this question of how we should relate to the ancestry of the 1AC. Our argument is instead that we should relate to it as our Peterson evidence indicates by understanding the world is not ontological, but we are instead all ontological. It is the understanding of incorporeality. Now, this is also an argument as to why the alternative is able to engage in better forms of politics than that doesn't link to any of the ableist language arguments, because it's a reconceptualization of what we mean for it to be a body, how a body operates. By understanding that we are all specters is the only way to create it. Their Magnola arguments on European theorists is just a reason why there are some good forms of cultural ideas. Not all are good, but some may be good in the abstract. Their arguments on Western indigenous knowledge engaging in genocide are all answered above, because it proves the alternative is able to resolve the better strategy, which means that there's only a risk that it's a good idea.
Ask one question, sorry, real quick. What was it, repeat the alternative for social death, just real quick.
We are all specters. Embrace that we are all specters.
What do you do for indigenous survival? Well, I would say, as of the 2NC, I would say that we have, I have forwarded that the use of blind as a slur is not the way to
No, I
actually
got
slur.
how it affects you. What does it do for Indigenous survival?
Well, I would say that from my perspective and the sort of social exclusion that I feel as a person with disabilities is something that is, as our training evidence indicates, a prior question to those other things because
To what other things? What are those
to
other
things like the struggles of Indigenous people because
Oh,
it's
so
a
you
question.
perceive struggles of Indigenous people.
What's that? I'm not saying those aren't important. I'm saying that you have to
No, no,
come to
yeah,
terms
yeah.
with the fact that
It's
ableist
okay.
language pervades those cultures before we create solutions to them.
What was that that you just said?
We have to understand that ableist language and ableist thought,
Yeah, let's talk about language. What language are we speaking now?
I would assume English is the language that I'm speaking in currently.
Mm-hmm. So how language, what was it that you said again? How language...
If you're going to say that language doesn't matter, that doesn't make the assumption of how I've interpreted it.
No,
I've
what did you
interpreted
say,
it as an
what did you
offensive
say before
term.
that we need to recognize how language does what?
Language affects society. That we
How
are
language
built-
affects society or certain people?
a society, and it shapes society and affects people. Ableism has shaped our entire society. This is not an argument that ableism is somehow like the root of everything or anything like that. Our argument is instead that it has shaped our
What do
society.
you do
It
about
does-
disabled Indigenous people?
well, one, I am in multiple disability rights activist groups on the campus of Gonzaga.
What does that do about any Indigenous people?
Well, considering our president is someone from the Navajo reservation close to my home in Arizona, he is someone who advocates for the rights of disabled indigenous populations.
I'm not asking you what other Indigenous people do for other Indigenous people. I'm asking you
I know, I'm
what
saying-
you do for Indigenous people here in this round.
Yes, I've helped to make the one of the tribal police stations in
I said in
the
this round, our argument is
I'm-
all based off
okay.
of our survival in this specific space that genocides us.
in this round. I have said that using ableist language is a problematic way to engage in helping
But what
indigenous
does it do
people.
for Indigenous survival?
It doesn't castigate those who experience disability every day. I don't know how,
Okay, cool.
like,
What is death?
what is death? Well, we would say death is simply the absence of life, but it's a different way of living.
What is the absence of life?
Death,
Can you only define them in terms of themselves?
no, life and death and spectrality are all stages of our existence.
So then what does it mean to be dead?
It's a different state of existence than life. They're binary to each other.